$950 trillion owed to you and me by Anna von Reitz. As we reported some months ago, Prince Philip absconded with $950 trillion USD by making false claims to receive assets that actually belonged to Canadians and Americans, then retired into private life in an attempt to consolidate his hold on the ill-gotten and unjust enrichment. It is a fundamental principle of British law from time immemorial that criminals not be allowed to profit from their crimes. What ho? Westminster? Whitehall? Members of the Privy Council? Your Britannic Majesty? We have explained how a succession of gross breaches of trust and commercial contract have resulted in equally gross and blatant fraud and racketeering against America and Americans by our British Territorial public servants and the members of Municipal United States Congresses. In the 1860s, the collapse of the federal states of states making up the original Confederacy established under the Articles of Confederation was deliberately misinterpreted as a collapse of our Federation of States. The British King saw his opportunity to pull a fast one and substitute Territorial United States franchises, merely calling themselves State of Blank for the federal states of states we are owed. This was done via a combination of similar names deceits and non-disclosure to the populace at the time. This unlawful conversion resulted in millions of Americans being disenfranchised and unable to cast ballots in what appeared to be public elections, but which were actually private corporation elections. Then, in the 1930s, the Pope and the British monarch further conspired with Democrats headed by FDR, to pull another fast one and pretend that our trade names were actually the names of British Territorial Foreign Situs Trusts. This unlawful conversion resulted in 1. Illegal conscription of Americans via the draft in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. 2. Illegal taxation of Americans who were not voluntarily or knowingly claiming British territorial citizenship, not employees of the territorial or municipal governments, and not dependents thereof. 3. Unlawful breach of our national trust. 4. False claims against our land and false issuance of titles related to our land holdings. 5. Unlawful and illegal probate of our individual estates. 6. Unlawful and illegal crimes of personage resulting in copyrighting our trade names as the names of British territorial franchise corporations and the creation of municipal public charitable trusts, public utilities, and Sestuike Vi gift estate trusts operated in our names by these vermin. And now, for the instant case. Americans have been uniformly subjected to conscription and mischaracterization of their nationality by the territorial government obligated to serve us. This has resulted in Americans being deliberately misidentified as British territorial citizens known as U.S. citizens. This is a capital crime under the Geneva Conventions. This in turn has led to the creation of millions of infant decedent estates, the evidence of which is apparent from the certificates which the vermin issued to unsuspecting parents. These birth certificates clearly show the details of the birth event of a live American baby and the probate of their natural estate to form a municipal Sestuike Vi estate trust operated out of Puerto Rico. This gigantic fraud scheme allowed gross crimes of personage and racketeering to occur on our shores for almost 100 years, and we are still suffering the effects of this outrageous international crime by the sanctimonious politicians who have been in league with the British trust breakers and the popes who have similarly betrayed their holy office and acted in the office of the Roman pontiff to defraud Americans. None of this is a matter of politics. None of it is a matter of an actual war. All of it is merely garden-variety bunco and white-collar crime carried out on a vast scale by trustees acting in breach of trust and conspiring together for mutual self-benefit. Which leads us to the current circumstance wherein Prince Philip owes the Canadian and American people $950 trillion USD in life force value annuities, which he claimed as part of the settlement of the bankruptcy of the Municipal Corporation of Canada. Life force value annuities are basically the equivalent of life insurance for a corporation, in this case, the Municipal Sestuike Vi gift estate trusts, which were purportedly all subsumed and liquidated while in the care taking possession of Canada. Prince Philip has claimed that all of these estates were part of the Commonwealth and belonged to unknown British territorial persons presumed lost at sea. But in fact those estates were formed as part of a deplorable international fraud scheme, and they belong for the most part to Americans who are the priority creditors of record. The schemers have attempted to run this through Canada to avoid direct claims against the estates via the parent corporation doing business as the United States, Inc. However, as Canada is in fact a franchise of the United States, Inc., and our claims against the United States, Inc., were already established and have since been perfected, there can be no doubt that our estates were not gifted, and were not abandoned, either. When our purported estates were liquidated by the bankruptcy of Canada, they died, liquidation being death for a corporation, and Prince Philip picked up the life force value annuities as corporate life insurance. The scenario, merely translated into the realm of legal fictions, is the same as the evil husband who takes out a life insurance policy on his wife, murders her, collects on the hefty secret life insurance he placed on her, and then runs off with his mistress. The same exact scam, and crime, has been applied to incorporated entities bearing our names, only in this case, the betrayed wives are incorporated entities that should never have existed, entities which have no legitimacy and therefore, no legitimate debt. However, if there are any debts, those debts should certainly be paid out of the life force value annuities that the insurance companies have given without proper consideration to Prince Philip and the living people, and all their property assets should be held harmless, free and clear, and any residuals owed from the rent, lease, taxation, or other profit making from our assets should also be returned to the victims of this criminal scheme. I am fairly sure that America and Canada are not the only countries that have been bilked in exactly the same way, and it won't take a team of rocket scientists to examine the books and come to the same conclusions. Australia, Germany and Japan have almost certainly suffered from the same fraud, as well as the nations of the EU, most of South America, and most of Africa, and numerous nations in the Middle East. Now, the popes and the Holy See and the Vatican are all in this pile of horse dung up to their necks. The predecessors of Benedict XVI and Francis had their paws all over this fraud scheme, and it can readily be proven that they and the Queen and the Vatican Bank, the Banks of England, Scotland, and France, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of New York Mellon, and others all benefited themselves royally at our expense via these institutionalized fraud mechanisms and improper bankruptcies and improper bankruptcy settlements and insurance frauds. Exposure of this vast criminality and actual correction is the only hope for humanity to go forward. Everyone reading this has the motivation to reclaim their country's public property and their own private assets from this multinational crime syndicate, and also to demand their piece of the profits. After all, these corporations used our assets to obtain their profits and did so via a process of fraud and coercion and false claims in commerce, as well as probate fraud, personage, and mischaracterization of our nationalities, bankruptcy fraud and insurance fraud. The criminals must not be allowed to profit from their crimes, and those who have suffered for generations deserve to be compensated to the extent possible, which in the case of the Canadians and Americans is $950 t. Pay up. P.S. We don't care what you have to do to convince Prince Philip of the necessity of returning the value of our purloined assets directly to us with no further flim-flam, and since you failed to pierce the veil during the bankruptcy of these corporations, we trust that you will equally not honor his pretensions of entering private life and taking the insurance money you allowed to the actual beneficiaries with him. Please hit like, share, subscribe and get ready for many more Anna von Reitz videos.